Hey, welcome back. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about how, we're in this series, It Came From Within, and the idea is that we all have a filter. We've all developed it over time, at home, at work, in school, with friends, with family, in dating relationships, maybe especially even with complete strangers. We have this filter, and everything that we say and do passes through that filter. But even the most carefully monitored filter can fail. And when it does, that failure can reveal things that we hoped no one would ever see. Of course, we shouldn't really blame the filter because it's not the source of our trouble. These unhealthy things, they don't lurk inside the filter. They come from our heart. You would say, from my heart? No, you don't understand. That's not who I am. Really? Because if we would even just go to the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 12, the last part of verse 34, he says, "For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." Eventually, whatever's in there is going to bubble to the surface. He goes on to say later in Matthew 15:19 to the first part of 20, he says, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what make a man unclean." See, gang, if we spend all our time just trying to manage the filter that we've put in place, that filter's going to get clogged up. And more of that gunk will inevitably kind of seep out. And think about this. Even the heaviest of filters they're designed by nature to sort of restrict flow, right? You channel everything through that filter. And so you might think, well, I'll just put a heavier filter in place. Well, here's the deal. Think about your life this way. Living your life trying to live it through this really restrictive filter is just going to render a weaker version of yourself. A less true version of yourself. Because living that way through your filter is basically saying, I never want anybody to see what's inside. I don't know. I don't want to live like that. What we really need to do is focus our attention not on the filter, but on the source of the trouble. We need to focus it on our hearts. So like Solomon says, he tells us this in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Since our hearts need to be protected, this series is really focused on exposing, in this case, 4 very distinct, what we'll just call heart issues that start small, often kind of creep in there, kind of tiny, but can become huge monsters lurking inside of us. It's important to destroy these monsters because if one of them is wreaking havoc in your heart, it's only a matter of time before it breaks through the filter and it starts running amok and wreaking havoc on the outside. Maybe it already has. We're using 4, just for fun, we're using 4 classic movie monsters to represent each of these heart issues. Last week we used the mummy to talk about guilt. And like the mummy, what we talked about was that guilt can somehow seem like an unrelenting force that just keeps coming. Like we talked about chase scenes in most of the old classic mummy movies, right? That they're really almost comical when you kind of break it down to the idea of seeing that thing coming at you. You know, you remember the old mummy movies? And the whole idea was like, the mummy, walk faster. You know, I mean, why are we terrified of the mummy? It's because it just doesn't quit, right? It's the reason why zombie movies and that genre is so popular today. It's sort of that unrelenting, it's never going to stop kind of thing. Guilt is like that. It can be an unrelenting, seemingly unstoppable force that just keeps coming, since it's rooted in this undeniable feeling that I owe you something. I owe you something. Now, we also talked about how the best way to untangle all that guilt inside of us was through the appropriate avenues, and I want to make sure you hear that caveat, the appropriate avenues of confession. Just expose it to the light. And I'll take the aside here just to say that every time I talk about that, what people say is, that sounds really messy. Wouldn't it just be better for everybody if I just kept it to myself? And I would say, well, you don't need to shout it from the rooftops. You don't need to you don't need to walk around saying, well, this is the thing that I feel guilty about. You don't need to have it printed up on a t-shirt and wear it around. But the appropriate disclosure is good, because the reality is the deed is already done, right? I mean, saying, well, wouldn't it be better for the other person if I just never told them? Probably not. I mean, confession isn't what hurts people. It's sin that hurts people. So the damage is already done. It's just that maybe not everybody is aware of it yet. And the longer something goes unspoken, the more potential damage it can do long term. We tracking? If you live more than 30 years on this earth, you start to understand that in a very visceral way. Keep short accounts. All right. Now, guilt is often hidden, isn't it? It's something that we carry around inside us. And even people closest to us may not realize we're wrestling with it. This week's hard issue, on the other hand, is what would get my vote for most likely to come through the filter and just spread itself all over everybody else. All right? The hard issue we're talking about this week is anger. And before I go any farther, we need to name our monster. So, because this is so much fun for me, I'll give you the scene. I really wish I should just have the band come up and play spooky music, or the soundtrack to Scooby-Doo, which, come on, is the best of that genre ever, right? Really. It's just the best. Anyway, so here's the scene. A lonely road winds its way through the dense woods on a clear, still night. Out on the road, we have a lonelier individual walking. Maybe they're a lost hiker trying to find lodging for the night. Maybe they're a stranded motorist who's looking for a gas station, whatever the case. They're on the road by necessity, not by choice. And as they round the corner, a clearing in the trees reveals the moon bright and full just beyond the hilltop. But then they see something else on the hilltop, and a shiver runs down their spine. Clearly visible in the moonlight, they see the Wolfman. Cue dramatic howl. Ow, yes. All right. Anger is a lot like our classic werewolf. All right. Now, first of all, I would say this. Anger displays itself in a beastly transformation, doesn't it? Anger displays itself in a beastly kind of transformation. Over the years, there have been quite a few adaptations of the Wolfman. Now, some are pretty hokey. Some are downright disturbing. But at the core, the classic story is about a normally mild-mannered person who transforms into a savage beast. And the beast goes on uncontrollable rampages that terrorize, often brutalize another person. Now, seriously, could there be a better definition for raw anger? Though your symptoms may be different than mine, anger transforms us, doesn't it? It makes us seem like, feel like, maybe look like, maybe act like a different person entirely. Maybe your face gets a little flushed, or your blood pressure rises. Maybe you feel your breathing or your heart rate change. Adrenaline starts to surge. Your focus narrows. Our expression may change. And so may the tone or the volume of our voice. And it's not just louder. Sometimes when people get angry, they get quieter. I'm sometimes guilty of that. Without question, there is a transformation that happens. And that transformation reveals a truth that might be a little more than uncomfortable for most of us to think about. It's sort of like we read in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 19. This is what it says: as water reflects a face, so a man's heart reflects the man. Just maybe a reiteration of what we've been talking about as the overall theme for this whole series. The anger that breaks through our filters, no matter how well concealed it may normally be, that anger is a part of us because it finds its home, its source, in our hearts. But at this point, okay, we need to address the elephant in the room, or the wolf, whatever the case may be. Anyway, the glaring question here is, isn't some anger good? We live in this world where you have to admit, if you weren't in this room with me right now doing church, you might say, oh yeah, well, there's places where, anger is justifiable. I mean, it's just, you may not even have an actual reason behind it. But if you're talking to your buddy, it might be that, sometimes you just, and what you're expecting is for them to immediately go, yeah. Sometimes it's just, you have to do that. And I would say, maybe sometimes anger is legitimate. I mean, sometimes, since anger is an emotion, it's brought on by, by something happening that is wrong. Morally wrong. And we're angry about that. And we want to do something about that. And that's not a bad anger, is it? Jesus got angry, didn't he? I mean, the answer to that is yes, he did. He was angry at the money changers in the temple, wasn't he? He was angry because they had set up this system. Because, of course, in the temple, the Jewish people were bringing sacrifices, for atonement. They were bringing sin offerings. And to bring a sin offering that was acceptable, you had to bring an offering that was without spot or blemish. Unblemished animal. Now, has anybody here ever done FFA or 4-H? Raised an animal? One yes over there. Yeah, okay. I've been to enough livestock shows. I was in youth ministry for a while, okay? I've been to enough livestock shows to know people can raise an animal in pristine circumstances and conditions. They bring them to the show. They're walking down the chute with their pig. Okay, let's just do pig, because this is if you've ever been around a pig, you know how easily this happens, all right? You're walking down the chute with the pig. You're getting ready to go into the arena. And right before they open the gate for you to go in, where everybody marches their pigs around with the little goad, slap, keep pig in place, right? One of the pigs decides, I ain't having it, right? And it turns and it bites another pig. Have you not ever seen this? Come on, FFAers, come on, right? And what happens to that poor pig that's a victim? Blemished. That pig is not going to win now. It's just not going to win. No fault of its own. Think about how hard it was to bring a spotless animal to the temple from 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 miles away when you were walking. You got your little lamb that you're trying to bring from one place to the other, and you're trying to keep it from getting injured or wounded or hurt on this long, extended travel camp out. So what happened is you could actually buy animals in the temple courts, which seems like a very convenient thing, which it was a convenient thing, except you had to buy them with temple money. Now, if you look through your scripture to find out where God said to put temple money into place, you won't find it. Because that wasn't God's idea. That was some entrepreneurial, ruling class Jewish folks of the time that decided, you know what? Let's just make temple currency. And so the people would have to exchange their money for temple currency when they got to the temple. Hence the term money changers. And I don't know if you've ever been in an airport and you had to exchange your currency for foreign currency, and there were spots where they would tell you don't go to that spot because they're going to give you a far worse exchange than if you go over here. Or if you just wait till you get out of the airport and you go over here. That was the temple money changers. Only there was no place outside the temple to do it. They had a monopoly. Could charge whatever they wanted. And Jesus was angry with them about that, which is the reason why he did not once but twice drive them out of the temple. At one point it said he made a whip out of cords and went in, Indiana Jones style, and drove them out of the temple and flipped over the tables. This is what I think of your money changing. Even went as far to say, it's written, my house will be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of thieves. He was angry. There's no doubt about that made him angry. So there is such a thing as righteous anger, guys. It's a thing. But now all that buildup leads me to this statement, and I hope you hear it. Righteous anger is not a lifestyle. Righteous anger is not a lifestyle. If you're trying to justify a lifestyle of ongoing anger, it's not righteous. Even on Facebook. Maybe especially on Facebook. Most of us need to take a break from Facebook. No, I'm just saying. You're not going to find a good time. If you're looking to coast through Facebook and not be angry, you are barking up the wrong tree. All right? Don't fuel a lifestyle that is not righteous. Listen to what Ephesians says, Ephesians chapter 4. Just the first part of verse 26 here says, in your anger, do not sin. That's why we know righteous anger is not a lifestyle, because you can't maintain anger. I mean, you can, but it won't stay righteous. For you to maintain anger, you need to keep fueling it. And just like a growing fire needs to consume more and more, growing anger needs to consume more and more. And eventually, it doesn't care what the fuel is. It's just grabbing for anything. So ask yourself, in my anger, am I bringing about good? It's a very simple question to ask yourself. If you find yourself getting angry, well, would this anger bring about good? I mean, clearly in the case of Jesus and the temple, his anger brought about good. His anger was designed to expose the corruption of the money changers and the people that were putting them in place, right? So just ask yourself, is this thing that I'm angry about, will my anger bring about good here? If it won't, understand that you are harboring a beast. You're inviting it in. An animal that's waiting to get out and hurt somebody. And no matter how much of a part of you that beast might become, it has to go. It has to go. And if you've been struggling with anger for a long time, this is one of those things where you may not be scared that you can't get rid of it. Right now, that beast might be telling you, why should I have to go? Maybe you've told yourself, I like my anger. It's what keeps me warm at night. Yep. I've said that too. Are you surprised? Preacher knows that? Yeah. I'm just a dude. So let's dig down to the roots and let's look at where this monster really comes from. Now, just for fun, so we have some more analogy to work with, because I love that. Let's talk about the Wolfman a little bit, okay? Now, released in 1941, the first Wolfman movie was actually not the first werewolf movie of its kind, okay? We might recognize the Wolfman as kind of starting it all, but believe it or not, there was a movie a little bit earlier that kind of started the whole genre. That honor goes to the 1935 film, The Werewolf of London. Not to be confused with the Warren Zevon song of the same name, which is still a lot of fun. His hair was perfect. But that's where he got the name for the song, obviously. We see, I find it interesting that at this point, the werewolf gets equal billing with the actress that plays opposite the werewolf. You notice that? And actually, it's more important for her to be seen than him. He's got like a little half-face thing going over here, you know. And yeah, there's a monster in this movie too, okay? So clearly, they weren't really aware that it was going to be such a popular genre, okay? Despite this one being the first, I would say arguably the most iconic images of the Wolfman that we have, they don't even belong to the first Wolfman movie. They belong to a guy named Lon Chaney Jr. There he is, okay? And he looks like something else too. We've got another image of him too up here. There he is. There we go, okay? Now, that movie storyline was also compelling, not to mention influential, because Chaney's character, the mild-mannered Lawrence Talbot, is transformed because he himself is a victim, right? He is bitten while trying to save someone else. He's defending someone else and he's attacked. Oh my goodness. I mean, it just keeps serving the purpose this morning, doesn't it? I mean, anger works the same way. So many people that are carrying around anger because they've been victimized themselves. The crazy thing is, once you're bitten, anger becomes a very dangerous infection, and we have to deal with it. What I'm about to say, it isn't going to be pleasant to hear. Not for me, maybe not for you. As a matter of fact, you might really want to argue with me about this, but I'm asking you to hear me out because I think it's one of the most concise and honest ways to put things. Most of the time, we get angry because we want something and don't get it. I'll say that again. Most of the time, we get angry purely because we want something and we don't get it. This encompasses things that we deserve, as well as things that we don't. It takes into account things that happen to us, things that happen to others. In short, it includes everything that we are involved in or have an opinion about. Every time you want something and you don't get it, whether it's legitimate and reasonable or not, there is a sense in which something has been taken from you. Last week we talked about how guilt says, I owe you. Well, you can flip it on its ear. Anger says, you owe me. In this world of kind of account deficits, we talked about that, how most of these heart issues can be described in terms of a debt and a debtor relationship. In the case of anger, the idea that typically fuels it at the bottom is, you owe me. Somebody that's been passed over for a promotion, they might think, and they may truly have earned that promotion, but they get passed over. What would they often say they feel like? I've been robbed of that position. A single parent whose spouse just took off. You stole our marriage. You owe me a marriage. You owe our children a parent. Oh, I know that's painful to think about, but you know that that's the way it feels. The abused child, no matter how old they get. You stole my ability to trust. You stole my innocence. You robbed me of my purity. I have sat in way too many sessions like that. And it breaks my heart every single time. There is definitely a debt there. And we want the debt paid back, don't we? The problem is, this is often a debt that simply cannot be adequately repaid. Can't go back in time and undo what's been done. No apology, no restitution can make something that has happened unhappen. This is often the place where anger creeps in. And it sets up a very cozy home inside your heart because it tells you, I will help you deal with this. The trouble with anger is that, honestly, I think sometimes it feels good to be angry. Can I just say that? Is that okay? Does anybody agree with that statement? I mean, sometimes just in the moment, it might feel good to be a little bit angry about something. The crazy thing about anger, though, is that it really, especially, even with righteous anger, we often come away shaky a little bit when it's over. Because anger never pacifies the pain. The anger lets us express the wound, but it does nothing to heal it. And the problem with ongoing anger is that it's like reopening the wound. Trying to find a way to say that. That's not really gross. But do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever dealt with a child maybe that had a little bit of a compulsive tendency to mess with the boo-boos? To pick at the scab and just keep it going and going and going and going and going and going and going. And it's like, and you're like, I'm going to tape your arm up with surgical tape so that you cannot get to that until it heals. Here is 4 pounds of Neosporin, 8 Band-Aids, and some athletic tape. You are not getting at that thing, you know? No experience in that. But anger's a lot like that. We think this is going to be better, and in the process of acting on it, all we do is we just reopen the wound, and we keep reopening the wound, and we keep reopening the wound. Oh, man, it's just an unending, vicious cycle. And like an infection, it slowly begins to spread out, and it starts to seep into other parts of our life. Remember, the heart, we're supposed to guard it. Why? Because it's the wellspring of life. If the source is polluted, if it's tainted with something, eventually everything else will follow. And the effects can be explosive. Jesus told us that a tree could be identified by its fruit, right? We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Now, understand, if the roots of your heart are growing in anger, your tree is going to yield a very destructive fruition. The fruit of that tree is going to be destructive. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 33 says this: "For as churning the milk produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife." When Paul was talking about anger to the Ephesians, Ephesians is really going to help us today. When Paul was talking about anger to the Ephesians, he followed the verse that I read a little bit earlier, "In your anger do not sin." He followed that by saying this in Ephesians chapter 4, we're here in 26, the second part of that verse, into 27. He says, "Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Oh, man. There it is. There's the classic verse right there. And therein also lies, I think, one of the most confusing passages in Scripture. And as somebody that's done a fair bit of pastoral counseling and has handed that ball off to other counselors, I can tell you this is something that we really probably need to unpack a little bit for a second. Lest I have more appointments with very, very tired people. I think we got to unpack this verse because it kind of seems impossible to live out practically. I will say this, like if you're married, this verse can be a nightmare if you're trying to follow it to the letter. We'll just hold on to that thought. What Paul is doing here is he's taking literally a popular phrase from the day, a colloquial saying that the Greeks used, and he's co-opting that to establish some common ground with the people. So the phrase, "Don't let the sun go down on your anger or while you're still angry," was a cultural proverb from that day. Sort of like saying the early bird gets the worm. Paul uses it because he wants to have a familiar cultural tie-in, just common ground as he gets the ball rolling on this communication here. But because of this, I think we need to take it for what it is. It's a cultural proverb. So here's what I mean. What if you get angry 20 minutes before the sun goes down and it can't get worked out? And then it's dark. Like we're literally saying you got to do this. Then all of a sudden it's like you almost have the chess clocks that the chess masters use when they're going after each other. Bing. Okay, we got what time is sundown today? 7:35. It's 7:08. Oh, okay. Here we go. what happens if that doesn't work out? Have you failed miserably? Oh my goodness. Some people take it to mean you shouldn't go to bed angry. Here's where it comes back in, married folks. Married couples, are you supposed to stay up till 4 in the morning trying to get it worked out? Anybody ever tried that? How'd that work out? I mean, seriously, if we were to try to do that, long about, like say it's 11 o'clock, long about 11:08, Tamara would be asleep. Because she just goes to bed, you know? She's like, and then she just turns off, you know? Seriously, I've been talking to myself for 4 hours. I suppose I could say that I reconciled it. Any argument? No, okay. You know? It won't work. It doesn't work like that. I believe Paul is saying, get rid of your anger as soon as possible. As soon as possible. If we interpret it via the cultural proverb that it was, that's what that meant. Get rid of the anger as soon as possible. If you can, don't even let the sun go down in your anger. But if that's not possible, don't choose to carry it longer than you absolutely have to. See, the problem with kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to that expression is that too many people want to just say, well, I'll just let it go. Now, if you really can forgive and let it go, that's great. But too many people say that, but they don't. They don't let it go. And see, there's the problem. Oh my goodness. What's worse than letting the sun go down on your anger in the moment is letting the sun go down on a season of your life while you're angry about something. I'm not even really sure how to put this, but too many people, I think, hang on to their anger. They tell themselves, I'm just let that go, and they don't. And so I don't know where it goes, but it goes someplace. There's some kind of anger reservoir, like a little backpack. We're not letting it go. It's dragging along behind us, hanging onto our back. And then we get angry again, and it goes in the backpack. And we don't deal with it. And then another thing goes in the backpack, and then another thing. And the worst thing that can happen is a season of your life passes, and that anger is unresolved. And here's why it is so dangerous. When we pass from one season to another with something like that attached to us, we tend to lose sight of what it was about in the first place. If you move from one season of your life to another season, harboring anger and resentment that is unresolved, it is very likely that at some point you will eventually discover that you're just angry. You can't even pinpoint why. It's just that you're angry. And if I could put it another way, which I think we're all connecting the dots already, but I would say this. You become that angry person. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you ever spoken to somebody you know they're an angry person? I think that if you are a stand-up comedian, it is very difficult to live your entire life if you survive that long, because unfortunately stand-up comedians have a horrible rate of depression and suicide. Horrible. and self-destruction. But if you live into your older age, it's hard to find a stand-up comic that doesn't just get angry. You see it on display in their acts. You read the people that post about it. Went to see so-and-so, they're just angry now. Used to be funny, now they're just angry. I don't think it's just stand-up comedians that have that problem. I think it's just that those folks live their life on display in front of everybody else. And the content of their acts are their lives, essentially. They're mining their own lives and their own experiences for the things that they do in their acts. And so you get to see the progression of what's happening in their life. But if we were honest, and we could just look across the spectrum of society, we would see that that happens to a lot of people. The sun goes down on one, then another season in our lives. And eventually, we don't know why, but we just are grumpy. And it doesn't take anything to make us mad anymore. And we're not afraid to let anybody and everybody know about it. I wish it weren't true. But it is. Now, eventually, if we become angry enough that it just makes us into an angry person, it's going to come out directed at somebody that's completely innocent. That's just the way it works. So when we get to verse 27, Paul's done with cultural proverbs. So, in other words, he really meant that extending anger beyond the season leaves an open door, an invitation for the very real devil to wreak havoc in your life. Yes, don't let the sun go down in your anger. Cultural proverb. Deal with it as soon as you can. But the next verse, don't give the devil a foothold. He's literally saying, look, get rid of your anger, because if you become an angry person, you are literally setting up shop for your enemy, just to wreak havoc in your life. You're giving him an open door. Remember that beastly transformation that happens when we get angry? I feel like sometimes when I've watched somebody, or when I've had that happen to me, an outburst, when you're so angry that something just comes out, it almost feels like you're the puppet, that somebody else is working the strings. Now, unfortunately, most often, the reality is we know that it came from inside us, and we know that we said that and we contrived it. But don't miss the fact that your enemy is seeking to plant things inside you all the time. And when you're angry, you're just laying a garden open for him to plant many, many, many seeds. Now, you can be angry about this. Ooh, do you think they really meant it when they said that? Oh, man. Does anybody that owns a Prius drive right? I have a very good friend that drives a Prius, and they drive very well. All right. The reality is we give the devil a foothold. We do. And there is an urgency to Paul's statement, because he wants us to understand that there is a lot at stake. He actually kind of builds on that urgency when we read down a few verses into his instructions in Ephesians 4, chapter 31. He says this: get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Just get rid of it. So when we read that, we can see there's no question about what he wants us to do, right? There's an urgency in it. The imperative is get rid of this stuff. Bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander. And just in case he'd forgotten anything, he gives it this little blanket, every form of malice there, right? He just says, get it out. Get it out. Be afraid of this thing lurking inside you. Afraid enough that you will be desperate enough to take the action necessary to get it out. Don't let it set up shop and control you, is what he's saying. And just in case you're wondering, the whole getting rid of it thing, it overrides fairness. It overrides justice. It overrides blame and being paid back. We have to destroy this monster, because the reality is, if you think about it, if fairness and justice overrode the imperative to get rid of it, we would all live with anger for the rest of our lives, because much of life just isn't fair. That's part of the problem of sin in this world. It brought a fallen state. And things just aren't fair. People do things that are not right. And sometimes you are the recipient of that not right thing, and it hurts. And it causes long-term damage. And it can stay in there and just fester. And as much as we think, I've got to hang on to this toward that person because they've got to pay, the reality is your anger probably isn't hurting that other person at all. It's only hurting one person. All right. If your problem is a werewolf, the solution is a silver bullet, right? Right? So, when it comes to anger, we do have a silver bullet like this. There's a powerful solution, a very powerful solution to this problem. Oh boy. I hope everybody take a breath. Here we go. You can find it in Ephesians 4, the first part of verse 32, all right? Paul says, be kind and compassionate to one another. Oh man, can we even say that? Forgiving each other. I know. I just know already. I know that I'm in danger of losing everybody in this room right now. Because somebody here is going, are you serious? Really? I sat through this for you to tell me to forgive? Come on. If I forgive them, they get off the hook. They're probably going to end up doing it to somebody else. They have to pay. It's not fair. And you're right, it's not fair. It's not fair. And I'm just going to admit that and say that. It is not fair. But still, Paul says, forgive. Well, Paul, that's easy for you to say, Mr. First Century. But you don't know my story. It was like 95% their fault. Paul still says, forgive. And just so you know, he wrote that letter to the Ephesians, he wrote it from prison while waiting to stand trial for a crime that he didn't commit. All right, but in my case, it's 100% their fault. It was the other person completely. Paul seems to understand that we're going to really chafe at this. We're not going to want to follow through with this because it does just beat against our sense of fairness. So he tries to put it in perspective for us, and that's the entirety of Ephesians 4:32. Let me read the whole verse, okay? Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. The verse and really the whole teaching is all about perspective. When addressing this in the book that I've patterned a lot of these messages after, Andy Stanley, who wrote that book, he writes, whenever I talk to someone who is hesitant to forgive, invariably it's because this person is evaluating their decision in light of what was done to them rather than what was done for them. That makes sense. Gang, I understand that forgiveness is counterintuitive. I get it, because it is. It's counterintuitive to our ideas about what's fair and what's just. It's a response, really, isn't it? It's not a reaction. Forgiveness is not really a reactive thing. But that could be the beauty about it. Paul is telling us to choose to respond and not react. Respond more like Jesus, less like the person that did the hurting of you in the first place. And by the way, when you respond, you begin to have a choice in the matter, don't you? I've talked about this before. Anybody ever get those pink high bounce balls from like the dime store or Walmart or someplace else? Those kind of rubber balls that, it's like, I think if you're a boy, like these things just appear in your house. But it's about the size of a racquetball. You could say a racquetball too is a great thing if you happen to have one of those. But we used to take those pink balls and we would throw them against the wall. Okay? When we were by ourselves, find a brick wall, throw it against the wall with your ball glove. And the great thing about the pink rubber ball was that it had no choice in the matter. It was just an agent of reaction. It was going to bounce back. If you threw it high, it was going to bounce down low onto the ground and then take a high hop. If you threw it against the ground before it hit the wall, it was going to go high and you were going to have to field it like that. If you threw it straight against the wall, it was going to come back at you and you might get smacked in the head, You only do that one time usually, maybe two if you need a little extra help. But the reality is the pink ball was just reacting. And you are so much more than the pink ball. Right? You don't have to be bound by reaction. You can choose to respond. Choosing to forgive is a response. You're reflecting the character and the nature of the God who made you and who loves you, not the character and nature of the one who hurt you and opened the wound in the first place. When he was talking about this, Andy Stanley shared 4 things that facilitate forgiveness, and we're just going to wind through them real quick as we wind down here, okay? So here they are. The first thing to ask is, who am I really angry with? You may need to do this, especially if you feel like maybe more than one season has passed on your anger. Who am I really angry with? Dig deep. Don't give up until you know. Now next, second, figure out exactly what they took. In other words, what do they owe you? Be specific. Don't skimp. Be thorough about this. What do they owe you? Third, decide to cancel the debt. Decide to cancel the debt. You have to choose to forgive. You may want to consider making a big deal out of this for yourself, maybe through some kind of ceremony. If you've been thorough about what they owe you, maybe you wrote it down. Maybe what you want to do now is run it through a paper shredder. Maybe you want to burn it. Maybe you want to rip it up. I don't know. You may have to repeat this process multiple times. There was somebody in my life that I had a very hard time forgiving with, and I honestly spent 6 months every day saying, I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. And one day, walking to the mailbox, I realized that I really had. But it took a good 6 months for my reality to catch up to my mentality. So don't be afraid if you say that and you think, I don't feel like I forgave him. Say it again. Do it again. It's important. Cancel the debt. Cancel the debt every day if you have to. Now, the last thing, finally, commit yourself to keeping short accounts. In other words, whenever possible, again, don't let the sun go down on your anger, on a season of your anger, okay? Instead, choose to walk through all the above steps, and then just let it go. Let it go. Let it go. All right. As we finish up this morning, I want to go through the questions that I've been asking every week, heart questions. Are you ready for them? Again, you don't have to answer these out loud. You don't have to raise your hand. It's just something for you to think about, but I hope it helps you kind of focus your attention here. First question, is everything okay in your heart? Are you mad at anybody? Are you waiting around for somebody to come to you and make things right? Have you had any extended imaginary conversations with anybody lately? Have people ask you, what are you so angry about? Have you secretly celebrated someone's failure recently? Do you have any secrets that are eating at you? Anything going on in your life that you hope nobody discovers? Is there a question you hope no one ever asks you? Have you lied recently to somebody that you love? I'm asking as we close out, are you willing to dig deep and be thorough and cancel your debt? Will you forgive as you've been forgiven? It's the only way to kill this monster. Let's pray together.